Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Rutledge, and I'd like to call to order the GETAC Stroke Committee meeting. Let's see who's here. Feedback. George is here. Fillingham's here. Lisa. Here. Henry. Johanna. Deb.
Yep.
Warren's absent. Lawrence.
Yes.
Paulina. And Timothy Smith. Okay. All right. I guess we have some new members since the last stroke meeting, and we didn't meet last time because it conflicted with the International Stroke Conference in San Diego. So welcome.
Well,
Lawrence, can you tell us a few things about yourself?
Yes, sir. Retired paramedic with the city of El Paso. I also was secretary of the Border RAC-I, and currently assist in instructing at Texas Tech Simulation Center.
Well, welcome. We have plenty of work that you can help with. First up on discussion is a report from the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke, and I'm the liaison for that. And we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and in that, notes that I'd like to share with you is the Million Hearts Stakeholders Workshop was on May 1st, and it focused on hypertension control and expanding that throughout the state and many other metrics. Also, the state presented their 1305 PAC grant, and this is a grant that works on diabetes and school health programs, but also cardiovascular disease and stroke, and they hope to continue that program. And also letters of intent was sent to the CDC for a public health advisor and epidemiologist, and because of the monies that we got from the last legislature session, we're going to have additional people to help at the DSHS, specifically in regards to the cardiovascular disease and stroke and the data that we're going to start to collect. Lone Star Stroke presented their work that they've done so far. They've identified some candidate spoke centers to do telemedicine stroke and to do more research, and they're still in contract negotiations with the state. The American Heart Association also brought up their work on trying to help develop a legislative agenda for this fall. If you guys remember, one of the big reasons for us to get data in regards to stroke, EMS runs, and stuff like that is to make arguments to the state why GETAC needs money and why we need to foster and keep doing this to provide the best health care. The American Heart Association in that regards also had some stakeholder calls in regards to STEMI and stroke shareholders and how to best do that. They also are in the process of implementing their pulse oximetry screening. This is for newborns, and they'll be doing pulse oximetry on all newborns to make sure that they do well. AHA has also been implementing CPR training as a high school graduation requirement through the state. And that's basically my report on the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. Does anybody have any questions about that? None. And so let's move on to a report on the Regional Advisory Council Data Collection Work Group. Catherine can't make it, so Carly, I think you're going to give us a report on that.
Good afternoon. My name is Carly Bova, and I am the program coordinator for the Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke Program. I'd like to start by announcing that we have hired 2 positions to work on Rider 97. Carla Granado will be serving as project coordinator, and Kieran Bertel will be serving as the data analyst on this project. We've been working to amend the EMS tobacco contracts with the RACs to include, in order to receive pre-hospital and hospital data, and also to conduct a gap analysis that will help us to understand the capabilities and barriers in data collection. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Oh. I'll try to just speak louder. Thank you. Okay. So I'll just go back. So we're working to amend the EMS tobacco contracts with the RACs, and we're going to be including, in order to receive hospital and pre-hospital data, and also to conduct a gap analysis that will help to understand the capabilities and barriers in data collection, and to identify gaps in stroke and STEMI systems of care. These contracts are nearing completion. They've been mailed out to the RACs, or will be mailed out by the end of this week. So hopefully that will be up and running soon. And we hope to be able to have some data to bring to the next legislative session. That's my update.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions?
I have a question as far as, is this just going to be pre-hospital data that you all are requesting from the different EMS agencies?
There's also going to be some hospital data that we're going to be requesting as well. So the RACs will be working with hospitals to get that data.
And to remind everyone, the data collection is really in 2 parts. The American Heart Association, with their Get With the Guidelines data collection, is going to be looking at hospital data. But because that's weighted to urban centers, places that have primary and comprehensive stroke centers, what it doesn't give us is a look at frontier and suburban sites and places that don't have stroke centers and stuff. The RAC data collection will provide us with data in that regards that is not any place, there's no place else that all that data is collected. And everybody wants more data. I mean, I have the same pressure. There's all this data I would like to get from the EMS and from the RACs, but we only have a small amount of money to give people to do this. And if you're a big RAC, it's not a big deal, but if you're a little RAC, you know, it's not much money. And hopefully the gap analysis that we'll do will be a good argument for us to get more data later. And what I'm hoping is that people will be thinking of what other data they want to get, and that we can build on this. And so with any start, it's not going to be perfect, and it'll give us an opportunity to look for new stuff to make it better. It's good? Okay, thank you. Next up is a report from our EMS Stroke Education Work Group, HT.
Yes, sir. We've visited with as many entities as we can, just kind of to get a feeling of what they feel about this, and it's pretty much just some like it, some don't. Some don't care, but I think we're to a point that we should probably put it to the committee for a vote to move forward to GETAC. I think it's something that we that's beneficial, that's gonna help us, and it's gonna push us forward. So, if nobody has any other questions, I would motion that we move forward to GETAC with this project.
Before discussion, is there a second? So we have a second. So discussion, can you remind everyone exactly what the details of the motion are or is?
Sure. What it is that pre-hospital folks, the EMS services would be required to have some stroke-specific CE in their recertification process. That's a 4-year process. To give you an example, right now, EMTs are required 72 hours to recert in a 4-year period. Intermediates 108, paramedics are 144. That number would not change. There is a subcategory called additional units in any approved category where you can pick up. You have to pick up 36 hours for a paramedic to be able to recert to reach your 144 hours. I think the plan is to take those hours out of that area and move it into stroke specific. That way there's no additional hours required. It's still the same amount of time. It's just that we are within a 4-year period refreshed with our latest stroke information.
And just to remind everyone from the Stroke Act 157.133, one of the things that we're supposed to be doing is assuring that stroke patients are cared for by health professionals with documented education and skill in the assessment and care of stroke throughout the pre-hospital and hospital course. So it's certainly consistent with that. And all that we're suggesting is, or all that we're recommending is for the medical directors, recommending the content of part of their CEs that are already required, correct?
Correct. And this takes nothing away from the medical director of the service. Any stroke content that he chooses for his particular group that would benefit them more perhaps than some other or just a generic thing, he's certainly allowed to do that. The state will, as part of their approved continuing education program, allow him to do that. So I don't think it's going to create a hardship on anyone.
Great. Any other discussion from the committee? Any discussion points from the floor that anyone has or thoughts? I know we've done this, this is, how many times has this come up? 4 or 5 times. So I think this is beat to death. Those in favor of moving this forward? And any opposed? The motion passes. Next is the EMS Stroke Education Program Work Group. Next is the Transport Bypass Work Group, Dr. Craven. And there's no report, right? But in his defense, we don't have the data back, and part of the Rider 97 is the RACs are going to be providing their transport plans, and I'm hoping that DSHS, when you have those, that we can forward those to Dr. Craven, and we can then have that as a resource for the other RACs. And just to remind people, in regards to the bypass protocol per the regulations, bypass protocols, guidelines for emergency transport of patients who are eligible within the time frame of United States FDA approved stroke care therapies. That's to the highest state designated stroke center. And in our state, we have the support stroke facilities, primary stroke centers, and comprehensive stroke centers. And so what this says is you have to move to the highest level based on a transport plan that's individualized per RACs. And later we're going to have a very interesting discussion by Dr. Allen how they've done that in Florida. They were slightly ahead of us in getting comprehensive stroke centers, but we beat them in regards to support stroke facilities. So we'll find an alternative that Dr. Allen has documented and shown the benefits of in a few minutes. But I think that's going to be really interesting, and we can hopefully have some good recommendations for people. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments? No? Okay. Next is the Trauma Systems Committee Registry Work Group report. Do we have a report? No, I don't think so. Okay, so in regards to the way things work on these committees, basically we have to have a discussion on items, at least at one meeting, to then be able to then vote on them at a subsequent meeting to move it on to the General Counsel. And in that regard, last time I brought up the issue, but this time would like to put forward this as a discussion item, and that is with the monies from Rider 97, we're going to be using the instrument of the American Heart Association to get with the guidelines to get data from the primary stroke centers and comprehensive stroke centers in the state. And if you guys remember, one of the requirements to be designated as a primary or comprehensive stroke center in the state is that you have to be reporting data to someone. And so what I would like to bring as a discussion item today is it would be our recommendation, but not mandated. It doesn't mean you can't use someone else's or can't use another one. But it should be I believe it should be the recommendation of our committee to use this instrument for the primary and comprehensive stroke centers to help us collect data. And so the recommendation would be that we would encourage the hospitals to use this instrument for their designation requirement of reporting stroke data. And so I'm bringing it up as a discussion item to move it forward at the next meeting. So saying that, are there any discussions or thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah.
As far as getting reports, will these entities be able to get like specific type of reports, or is it going to be their general reports that you get from Get With the Guidelines?
That's a really good question. So I think there's a couple answers to that. One, in the way the state's contracted, they're going to get this data. And then part of that data will be parsed, and we've asked for it, at least I've heard it being asked for, to go back to the RACs and to also go back to the hospitals. And then with the epidemiologists that we have and the new people that are working at the state, then we'll have that information to also look at gap analysis or trends or geographic changes throughout the state that can be possibly addressed in a legislative fashion. So I think the data can come back in many different ways. Is that your question?
So if Hospital A wanted a specific kind of report that wasn't on the list of the canned reports that you can get, would they be able to do that?
I don't know. Do we have anybody here from AHA? I see shaking heads, yes.
Each hospital has access to their own types of reports, an extensive list of reports that are ready to run, or they could actually manually create reports, as well as if a hospital is part of a RAC. What we did is create some benchmark groups specific to that RAC. So for the border RAC region, one of the hospitals could literally run a RAC regional report and not identify their data. It would just be an aggregate report of your region as a whole. That already exists regardless of what direction you go.
So in the beginning of your statement, you mentioned using some of the monies from Rider 97. Were you insinuating that you were going to subsidize some of the hospitals that were not on the AHA Go With the Guidelines program, or what did you refer to when you said monies? Because I know a certain percentage of the hospitals are not using it with the guidelines at this time, but a small percentage.
Right. Again, this is not mandatory to use Get With the Guideline software, but Carly, can you help me about how the money is given in that regard for that component of the data collection?
The hospitals pay their component for Get With the Guidelines, so they pay for that.
And so it's the state license and data collection that the money is where the money goes for
The
from
money's
Rider
actually
97.
going to pull the data so that our epidemiologists at DISHS can be able to pull that, create the reports that the RACs and the hospitals need that don't currently exist.
What is the hospital fee?
Around 1,900. But that's the cheap part. Everybody in here will tell you the part that's expensive is the manpower. And you can integrate it with your core measure system if you want to only some of the dam entry, but that's the expensive part is your extractor.
And also, I would point out, this doesn't mean you can't use other data collection systems. And a lot of people have data collection systems that are extremely sophisticated and very well tailored. This is just a first stab at trying to get a unified data collection for the state so that we can use that to try to lobby for more resources.
So just a clarification, so the hospitals are paying their fee,
Correct.
the RACs are paying their fee.
What fee is the RACs paying?
No fee to the RAC.
Oh, I wrote a check to AHA last year for the year she gives it.
Yeah, we can't even accept money from a government.
I'm not a government, I'm a nonprofit corporation.
Or I'm not familiar with
The
what.
RAC structure in the state.
Can
Daryl.
you pay for a regional report, perhaps, the creation of a nationwide regional report? That's the only thing that would have been in the position.
Rick, Daryl, anybody know?
I just don't want the RACs paying and the state paying because that's like multi-dipping the same data.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so since nobody was up on the mic, to be sure this is recorded, the question came up was, is the RAC going to be paying for this data? It was my understanding that the data that comes to the state and the state analysis, that data is going to be given back to the RACs and there won't be any charge for that. And Carly's shaking her head. And do you want to address that or confirm that?
For the official record, the American Heart Association isn't getting paid for any of this. The money from Rider 97 is going to DISHS. And DISHS is under contract with 3 or 4 different organizations to provide the data that the hospitals are collecting back. And so there is not, American Heart Association doesn't receive that. I will be interested because we definitely don't want to double dip. If the data is available in one place, we don't want to double dip. As it relates to other organizations, you can get your data. We could probably pull that data in too, but it would require the same type of contracts.
Okay, so don't send them any more checks.
I'm on the quality side. I'm sure my development people would like that. But.
So any other discussion? This is a very good discussion. No? Okay, so I'm going to put this on for next time for us to possibly vote for this to move it on to the General Counsel. Next up is considering the Brain Attack Coalition standards for stroke-ready hospitals as a basis for acceptable certification of level 3 stroke support facilities in Texas. So we've been approached by a couple of different entities, DNV, HFAP. They're all in the process of developing certification programs for what's called stroke-ready hospitals. There was a paper in Stroke not long ago from the Brain Attack Coalition, Mark Alberts up in Dallas, going over criteria, metrics, ways to go about certifying stroke-ready hospitals. We beat them to it. TTAF has done an outstanding job in certifying stroke-ready hospitals in our state. But to be a level playing field, I think it's important to have other people that can certify as well, and they're going to want to be certifying. So the problem then comes about for our committee is how do we go about giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down on certification programs by these other entities. And before, for primary stroke center and comprehensive stroke centers, we've used the Brain Attack Coalition's recommendations as a basis for us to make that decision. And so what I wanted to do is bring that up for discussion this time and a possible vote next time to accept the Brain Attack Coalition's recommendations. It's a basis then to certify other programs. Does it make sense? So, I mean, you can, so I'll start out the discussion, and some of the things, I mean, if you're like one of the torch hospitals, one of the smaller hospitals in the state, you know, one of the issues is money. You know, how do you become certified, how you take care of these patients. And one of the things I think TTAF did really well is they looked at not only the acute care given the TPA, but also what happens in the hospital afterwards. And I think one of the things that that we could argue or discuss is with the Brain Attack Coalition Stroke Ready Hospitals, they're a little bit light on what happens afterwards. They're primarily looking at getting the acute stroke treatment. But there really isn't another entity that does this in a way that we can use it. And to be consistent, that's why I was thinking that the BAC requirements would be what we ought to do. Does anybody have thoughts, or is this a burning issue for anyone? No, any discussion from the forum out there? Okay, hearing none, what we'll do is we'll put this on our agenda for next time for a possible vote. That'll give people a chance to think about this. There may be issues that we haven't thought about, but I think the BAC would be a good basis for our moving forward. Okay, next. I'm really happy to introduce a presentation by Evan Allen. For those of you guys who don't know, he's the medical director of Neuroscience Institute, the Florida Hospital in Orlando. But I think several people have heard him speak, and his papers that have come out. I got a chance to see him at the Stroke Belt Consortium. And what was, I think, very interesting is there have been a lot of arguments about primary stroke centers, comprehensive stroke centers. Do they actually make a difference? And then also in regards to transport plans, how do we, are there more efficient ways of doing transport? Does everyone with just a dropped finger need to go to a comprehensive stroke center? And so he's done this wonderful work on the benefits of a severity adjusted triage from primary to comprehensive stroke centers, and to show how that works. And so I hope you'll welcome him, and we'll get a chance to hear what he found. Yep, it's the bottom right-hand corner.
Hi, I'm Dr. Allen. Can you hear me okay in the back? All right, great. So I'm a stroke neurologist from Florida. I suppose compared to Texas, Florida is a 3-hit wonder going on a 4-hit wonder. We were the first state 9 years ago to have a whole state EMS bypass law, where you could bypass hospitals that were not state-designated stroke centers. The other thing we did is we were the first state to have comprehensive stroke centers be state-designated, and I think the third thing we did was this. We did kind of what I guess you spend time trying to do, take a really good idea from a Texas University Medical Center in a journal and cause it to happen in everyday life. Those are the three things we did. The fourth thing we're working on now is a paper just came out of WashU in St. Louis, and what it shows is 53% of the time, so worse than a coin flip, EMS is incorrect during the morning when they say a patient's last normal at this specific time. They're usually off by like 3.5 hours. So we're going to see what we can do with a simple training, 8-10 minute video to better instruct time last known well, that kind of thing. I'd say the last thing I do that's of interest is I work with Dr. Alberts, who's in this state actually on acute stroke ready hospitals. A significant, financial issue that I saw, in addition to being a physician, I have an MBA also, is, a general rule of medicine economics is, you want revenue to be greater than expenses. So to set up an acute stroke ready hospital, you usually have to have televideo, which for the most part nobody's giving you for free. And unless you have a stroke unit, which is not the easiest thing to pull off in an acute stroke ready hospital, you're supposed to just treat with TPA and then transfer all the patients out. Well, if you're increasing your expenses with the televideo and you're transferring all the stroke patients, so basically what we're looking at is how can you implement stroke units in these hospitals and decrease the price of televideo and allow them to keep as many of their patients and prove that they still get good outcomes. But at any rate, so this particular presentation, I was, I'll be honest and say I was surprised, honored, and slightly amazed that it actually won an international research award from the American Stroke Association. So I think Dr. Rutledge saw this and he wanted me to go ahead and present it to you. So this is discussing basically what we've been working on for many years in Florida, implementing severity-adjusted triage and bypass across the state of Florida. Now, most of the country outside my state of Florida takes suspected acute severe strokes to the nearest stroke center to first get IV TPA. And you have to honestly ask, why is that? It is certainly not because IV TPA will greatly help these patients. This 2007 American Stroke Association guideline states the issue of treating acute severe stroke with IV TPA alone when it says that complete recovery among patients with severe stroke, which they define as NIH stroke scale score greater than or equal to 20, improved actually very slightly with treatment, but overall success in this critically ill group of patients is low. Now, there have been studies in the New England Journal recently of intervention, and they've been negative, but there's subgroup analysis of IMS-3 that still gives room to hope that IV TPA plus intervention is better than IV TPA alone for severe stroke patients, especially if in future studies that intervention is done with fewer delays or newer generation devices. As you see in this slide, IMS-3 severe strokes, NIH stroke scale score greater than or equal to 20 had a trend towards better outcomes with IV TPA plus intervention than IV TPA alone. Is actually in the neighborhood of about 8%, meaning 1 out of about every 13, 14, 15 or so people with a severe stroke headed to a very bad outcome escapes with minimal or no disability, and it was almost statistically significant. The p-value was, 0.06. So if they'd had more patients or done intervention faster or perhaps had better devices, that actually might have been statistically significant. Now, this paper from the January 2013 issue of Stroke, a respected stroke thought leader, a guy from your neck of the woods actually, James Grata, calls for stroke severity to be used in EMS triage protocols. If you like this idea, then you would love my state of Florida. We've been doing this for a while. Actually, I was the person that's first sort of brought this idea to Florida and spread it around the state. In our state, as I mentioned, we got our EMS stroke bypass law in 2005, and then we spread severity-adjusted stroke triage and bypass to 3 of our 4 largest cities. It started with me in Orlando, and I brought it to suburban Orlando. Then it spread to Tampa. I brought it there, and then people picked it up and ran with it and brought it to Miami. And we just had a meeting of our largest regional stroke coalition in the central part of the state, and the state EMS medical director said, straw poll among state EMS medical directors across different counties, 40 to 50% of them use some form of severity of stroke in-field triage throughout our state. Now, the purpose, the point I wanted to make with this presentation is not only that this appears to work, but there's benefits to the primary stroke center that's getting bypassed, which is an important point because that's not immediately obvious. Becoming a primary stroke center and watching EMS roll right past you with stroke patients, I guess, is a bit like getting dressed up to the prom and not getting asked to actually dance or go to the prom. It tends to inspire significant, frequent complaints and unhappiness. But, I promised benefits for the primary stroke center and getting bypassed with severe acute strokes. And let's just highlight one of them that's very important. I don't know if you can actually hear me if I turn around and point at this, so I'm not going to do that. But what I want you to do is focus on the bottom third of this slide. It says AHA, ASA policy statement. This is a guideline for what EMS is supposed to do when they're transporting a stroke patient in an area where there's a primary stroke center within 20 minutes of a comprehensive stroke center. It says here, unless there are compelling mitigating circumstances, when there are several acceptable options within a well-defined geographic region, extra transportation times to reach another facility should be no more than 15 to 20 minutes. When several hospital options exist, EMS should seek care at the facility capable of offering the highest level of stroke care. Okay, here's benefit number one. What that means is, if you're a primary stroke center within 15 to 20 minutes of a comprehensive stroke center, EMS is supposed to bypass you, basically with everything. This, just looking for severity triaged, and then just bypassing you with that small segment of patients, I would think beats quite a bit being bypassed with everything. As you'll see, it's a couple of patients each month, and it's a couple of patients that can be pretty tricky to deal with and freak out your hospitalists and your ER. I think it is much better for the primary stroke center to just be bypassed for the acute and severe, severe only. Give them everything else. Just my opinion, and apparently Dr. Grata and others share that. So this is our study. It took place over 7 years, because I thought of this quite a while ago. I know Dr. Grata's article just came out in 2013, but this is something I've been thinking about for quite some time, and we implemented it many, many years ago. So in our study, we had two different counties, Seminole County and Lake County, that are both suburban areas in Orlando. Lake's a bit more rural than Seminole County. And both of these counties use different scales to assess stroke severity. The scale you should use if you try to do this is the LA Motor Scale. The reason these two counties use two different scales is I thought of this so long ago, the LA Motor Scale hadn't yet been fully worked out and proved to work in this situation. I had to use a German scale from Frankfurt. It's a nice scale, but it's not designed for this. It's not designed for EMS. Dr. Grata recommends you use the LA Motor Scale, and I second that. The only reason I use different scales is I was a little bit ahead there. So two different counties using two different scales, and acute stroke windows that range from 4 to 24 hours. If I had this to do over again, maybe I would have tried to convince EMS a little harder not to go all the way out to 24 hours. That didn't actually wind up being that useful. These two different scales identified patients with severity scale scores correlating to an NIH stroke scale score in the high teens and above. So they specifically in the field were able to figure out using these scales, NIH 17, 18, 19, and beyond. Now, unfortunately, this was a retrospective analysis, but we were still able to identify three important variables. We defined therapeutic yield as percentage of patients that got cranial neurosurgery or endovascular intervention during this admission that was not available at the bypass primary stroke center. And our therapeutic yield was 15%, meaning that 1 in every 6 to 7 patients got one of these procedures that wasn't available at the bypass primary stroke center. As you see in blue italics, half of those procedures were acute endovascular intervention for ischemic stroke. About a third of them were neurosurgery for an intracranial bleed, and there were some tumors thrown in there as well. I can think of ways that this yield could have been even higher in a different setting or with different parameters. Seminole County and Lake County, really old group of patients. It's very much a retirement sort of area. A younger population would have had a higher yield of patients because more patients would have been young enough to tolerate neurosurgery. Frequently, there are bleeds you get from those two counties, and they're just so old patients that neurosurgery won't operate on them. Also, I would recommend a more narrow window in the field. I don't see a great purpose in going all the way to 24 hours, but you can't always 100% exactly control what EMS is going to do. But now we've all pretty much agreed, narrow that down to about 3 to 4.5 hours out in the field. If you do that, then the patients that you get that are acute and severe are going to more likely have favorable imaging, CT, penumbral imaging, and your interventionists will be more likely to do intervention on them. Now, what does a therapeutic bypass yield of 15% mean? How does that compare, for example, to bypass of a closer hospital, maybe on the way to a level 1 trauma center? So we looked at that. We compared what we had, our bypass yield, to patients that were taken from Lake County, out of their county, to the level 1 trauma center in Orange County, where Orlando is. And what we found, the 15% therapeutic yield for stroke doing procedures that were not available at bypass hospitals was not statistically significantly different than the 18% of trauma bypass patients that got taken to the operating room in the first 48 hours. Now, in terms of diagnostic accuracy, these two above average EMS groups actually did pretty well. You add all the first three, ischemic stroke, TIA, and intracranial bleeds, 81% of them, the patients they brought us, either had an ischemic stroke, a TIA, or an intracranial bleed. And that's an important point. I said above average EMS groups. I did not prove in this research paper that the average EMS group can do this. Both of these groups are above average, and one of them is like the best in the state. I suspect average groups and below could do this, but these were above average groups. It's possible that the TIA patients they brought us in the ambulance looked like severe strokes, because a lot of them had large vessel occlusions that could have looked more severe in the ambulance and then gotten better once they got to the ER. Now, we studied the effects of this bypass on a subset of the data, a single primary stroke center bypassed by Seminole County EMS. So logistically, Seminole County EMS bypassed the primary stroke center with 3.6 suspected acute severe stroke patients each month. And just to emphasize, because if you're an EMS medical director and you try this, quite often you wind up with upset primary stroke centers. The most expeditious way to deal with that is to show them the guideline that says if you're within 20 minutes of a comprehensive stroke center, you're supposed to be bypassed with everything. Bypass with 3.6 patients a month versus bypass with everything. I think 3.6 patients a month is a much better way to do it, because then the primary stroke center still gets a lot of stroke patients and can still be ready to treat them pretty well. So they're bypassed with 3.6 suspected acute severe stroke patients each month, and Seminole County EMS doing this bypass traveled an additional 9.1 miles past the primary stroke center to the comprehensive stroke center. And what I did is I weeded down the patients that actually had stroke, TIA, or intracerebral hemorrhage. Wound up being 209 of those patients that got bypassed past the primary stroke center to the comprehensive stroke center. And I compared them to 643 patients that got brought directly to the primary stroke center. And what I was looking for is, okay, this group of patients that skipped the primary stroke center, were they sicker in any way, harder to deal with in any way than the ones that went directly to the primary stroke center? The answer is absolutely. Even though the age was quite similar, the 643 that went direct to the primary stroke center, 70.6 years versus 72.7 years, and the length of stay was about the same, major complication rate. And in an era where increasingly major complication rate not only affects how you get paid, but also is publicly reportable. We define major complications with stroke as respiratory failure, infection, DVT, PE, MI, or recurrent stroke in-house. It was significantly more likely that these patients that were bypassed to the comprehensive stroke center, skipping the primary stroke center, would have a major complication. 13% of the ones that went to the primary stroke center versus 34% of the sicker patients that went to the comprehensive stroke center. So it's almost 2.5 times greater chance that these patients that are skipping past the primary stroke center would have a major complication. And then this also really sort of resonates with the emergency room as well as the hospitalist. I can't speak for Texas, but in Florida, it often freaks out the emergency room to admit a bleed, same with hospitalists, a bleed to a hospital that doesn't have neurosurgery. I mean, setting aside the fact that most of these bleeds are not going to require surgery anyway, some of them are, and there's a lot of great anxiety about admitting them to a place with no neurosurgeon. What we found is the patients that went directly to the primary stroke center, they were about 15 times less likely to die in-house or get discharged to hospice with a bleed. 0.6% of the ones that went directly to the primary stroke center versus almost 1 in 10 of them that were bypassed to the comprehensive stroke center. And then finally, if all these patients had been sent to the primary stroke center was going to have to cough up 1 in 8 of them anyway. As you see, they were transferred back to the comprehensive stroke center for neurosurgery or endovascular intervention. Now, the guideline that I showed you a little bit earlier says that, the EMS is supposed to bypass the primary stroke center with everything. And as I presented this paper at the Stroke Belt Coalition, Mark Alberts, who helped write this guideline, says, well, the reason it reads like that is because we didn't have this data. Nobody knew that EMS could actually do this. It looks as if EMS can figure out huge, big, ginormous train wreck stroke versus all others, whether or not it's acute, and steer it to the comprehensive stroke center. So what he says is he thinks future he will write the guidelines differently. So in closing, as best we can tell, it looks as if EMS can do this. I think being bypassed for 3.5 strokes each month is better than being bypassed for the majority or all of them. And I think the sicker patients, steering them to the comprehensive stroke center can be more helpful. And finally, want to thank Seminole County EMS. They started doing this in about 2005 or 2006, and Lake County EMS was influential as well. I'll stop and take whatever questions you have.
Great, thank you. It's outstanding. That's why we had you here. Also, he put together a care package, and if anybody emails me, we basically have a resource kit for EMS medical directors who want to look at severity-adjusted stroke triage. And obviously, we have a committee looking at potential transport plans. Again, right now, our rule is that you have to go to the highest state-designated stroke center, but the reason we have RAC-centric approach to strokes is that there are some places that that's going to work and other places it's not going to work, and so I think it has to be tailored for each RAC. So saying that, questions from the audience, it's rare that we have such good chance to ask these questions.
Well, if no questions, I'll just mention one thing about what I sent him. So I got called to Mississippi and Illinois, basically to present the same thing. And EMS medical directors there kept asking, well, gee, how do you do this? Well, you need to train your medics about how they use the scale. So in what I sent him, we did a 2.5-minute video that, you can show to medics. And then we had our EMS medical directors that have implemented this do a video talking about pearls and pitfalls. And we included the paper from GRADA that says this is what should be done, and the paper from UCLA that talks about how well it works. If there's, any EMS medical director out there interested in doing that, contact Dr. Rutledge, and if he thinks that's okay, he'll forward that to you.
Any other questions?
Yes?
I just have one question. This all applies to ground transport, correct? Was there any consideration of air transport going on?
Oh, it was definitely both. So Lake County, a lot of air transport went on. Lake County's a little further away from Orlando than Seminole County is. So in the field, they would go ahead and figure out, okay, this is a LAM score of 4, which correlates to an 87% chance there's a large vessel occlusion, or this is a big bleed. And they would definitely do air a lot of times if weather would permit. Yeah.
Great, thanks so much. We can't let Florida beat us, can we? So we're up to general public comment. Are there any public comments or issues that anyone wants to bring up? Quiet audience.
Dr. Rutledge?
Yes.
I'd just like to announce that TTAF is having a cardiovascular neurology symposium at the Hyatt Lost Pines, September 26th. It's covering, sorry, Jane. Can you hear me? TTAF is having a cardiovascular neurology symposium September 26th at the Hyatt Lost Pines in Austin, or Bastrop. And it's covering STEMI, stroke, and great speakers, including Dr. Grada, will be there. So brochures are out front, or Brenda Putz, I think, has some. So please consider coming. I think you'll be really pleased with the information that you get.
Any other public comments, thoughts, or issues? Okay. So summary of this GTAC meeting, what we're going to do is we'll move forward to the General Counsel with our EMS stroke education program. Next time we'll be bringing back the American Heart Association instrument as a recommendation for state designation, and we'll be bringing back the BAC standards for level 3 stroke support facilities. Any other things that I miss? No. Are there any announcements? I do have an announcement. The Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke, we're going to be putting together some committees to work on chronic care for stroke, remediation. And so if anyone's interested in that, rehab center, how we can develop a state program for this, please contact me. A lot of you guys are aware of a unique program in Austin. What is it, one word at a time, the Austin Speech Labs. The idea is that stroke remediation on a statewide scale might be very cost effective for our state. And so that's what we're looking to do. So any other announcements?
I'd just like to let you
Yes.
know that Border Rack has, for the month of May, we've got like 4 electronic billboards around town that are showing the fast signs to a stroke and to call 911. So these are strategically placed along the interstate, I-10 and US 54, just a program that we've developed this month.
Excellent. Okay, seeing no more announcements, our next meeting is going to be August 20th. And I don't have anything else, so we'll stand adjourned. Thank you very much.